To you.
Thank you. So we're 12 minutes late because it's a huge topic. That's really what's going on. We would love to open it up to questions. I've printed out all the great questions that were sent to us. Um, and we can go through some of them if you feel like we haven't answered them. So I want to just open it up first, or we can, let's open it up. And then if we want to dive into what was sent to us, we can. So just unmute and yeah,
Nick, you put a really great question, Nick, in the chat. Do you want to ask?
Sure. I mean, this was earlier when Sophie, you were doing your part, but basically you were talking about the ping feeling of the leap. And I realized that I don't know if like I can do this where I'm hitting myself, and then the landing ping is much stronger than the leaping ping. And I got confused for a second.
Okay, great question. Can you hear my sound very clearly? Can you hear the sound pretty clearly? Okay, so this is what Rachel was talking about with this over versus on. And this answers, as we're answering questions, also gives us this incredible sense of security. So most of the time when we're leaping, we aren't immediately playing the note. That would be like just really jumping across the river, right, from place to place. We are leaping over that new pitch, both with the bow and with the left hand. And when we are over that pitch, we're not in the vicinity of it. We are really magnetically connected to that pitch, but not on the point of sound. And it creates this magic window in which we know we are there. We can feel it, we can see it, we can actually sort of hear it in our head. And then we can time the string exactly how you want. So the analogy with, tapping and river jumping, all the analogies, they do break down in the end because they're not playing the viola or playing the cello. But we have this incredibly golden moment of being over where we can time that arriving note exactly the way we want. So Nick, it's, if we're just doing this, they obviously feel like plop, 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 and we're not going to play like that. So there's a more sophisticated thing happening that enables us to control that. And that also gives us security. Like we can see that window, we can feel it, we know we're there, we're totally stable, play it how you want. Does that answer the question? Great question.
I have a quick question about portamentos. Rachel touched on like right arm, a little bit on left, but when she said speed, but so when we're doing a portamento, really what's happening is you are planning your arrival under the pitch, right? Or
yeah,
where
any portamento will necessarily travel slower. Right? Because you're actually creating more contact with the surfaces that you're engaged with. So they are by definition going to be a slower leap. They can't drag, or, we've got parts going on behind, but we have to find and time and very carefully decide, like how much are we going to make audible? It can't be vague, right? Otherwise we get stuck. I don't know if you probably can't. So I'm actually adding a little bit of forearm to connect to the string. So I'm not quite so much on the surface of the string, but I'm still off the point of sound. And it does make the arm travel in that leap slower. But
so pedagogically, when are you having students like experiment with that to find like how are I've just found I suddenly had a moment where it felt very vague when I was trying to teach the student. They're young, so maybe they don't have a lot of grasp, but yeah, I found it very. So are they experimenting with that speed?
I guess, so are you asking, with the student, are you trying to get them to use a portamento, or are you trying to get them to feel the spatial distance between the pitches?
actually a portamento, so the music calls for it. So yeah.
So I would ask them to decide, yeah, I mean, you can experiment. You need to decide rhythmically
Yeah.
where that's going to happen, right? Like how, I suppose you got a half note to a quarter note, right? You're leaping off that half note. How much of that leap do you want to hear as a portamento? Because that does affect the timing and the connection during that leap. So I think the important thing is you could work through it with a student and choose, make different choices. Let's try more of it. Let's try less of it and see what that feels like and what that sounds like.
Okay.
Can I just jump in for a sec, Sophie? Sorry, I thought, sorry, not Zoe, Zoe. It's sometimes helpful as well to just get them to really, really engage with that really slow playing of the string first.
Okay.
I found so that you actually are over the, you're over the destination. But if you really engage it, so the arm starts to feel lower and slower with the bow as well. So you're really engaging with that mechanism of really engaging with the string, sort of blowing that out a bit. That can be quite a helpful start. Yeah.
So I think what's confusing sometimes, like taking on from what Rachel was saying, is the difference between the travel and the playing, right? And when we're coming from old shifting stuff, those moments are completely vague. So, what Rachel just defined beautifully is this is the moment of playing, and then deciding how much of the travel you wish to hear, right, is going to be your portamento, but not muddling those up into what I think of as the soccer player sliding into goal, catching the ball, right?
Thank you. I have one more. Can I ask one more?
Yeah, of course.
This is, it's just because it was a question given to me when Sally just touched on landing, and I know you said the analogies end up breaking down, but when you're jumping with both feet and then you land with both feet versus sometimes it feels more natural depending on the distance to jump like from both feet, but you're landing, you're going, one foot is in front of the other. And so I had a student ask like, oh, are you jumping with both feet, landing with both feet on small leaps and then jumping with both feet, but leading with one foot on large leaps? And how is that? And it completely like
I think that's the point where you have to get off feet and go to arms and fingers. I think I would, if you're landing on, if you go to, that's like 1 foot, 2 feet, if you like, I think the important thing is to define however many fingers are playing or however many notes are playing. Okay, are you going one note to one note to two notes to one note? Like, what is involved here in that finger, hand, forearm unit? What are what's your leap off point? What's your arriving point? Where are you going next? And when are you going to do that?
Great, thank you.
That simplify it, right? Yeah.
Sophie? Maybe this is a question for Rachel, actually. Can you say a little bit more about the correlation of if I'm jumping with the bow and the left hand at the same time, about the speed difference, or is it similar? How do I choose?
So,
sorry, you go ahead. So
the speed difference is really, really interesting because if you just put your arm around an object, any object that sort of opens your hand, the fingers get to their touch points at different speeds based on how close or not close they are to the destination, right? And their length. So it's the different speed. You're not trying to slow anybody down. If you're going from here to here, they will travel according to their own speed based on how far away they are and how long they are and where they have to get to. What matters is that they go to an over and they play together. So they may arrive at slightly different times. If my bow is only, I don't know, can't quite think of an example. If my left hand was here and the bow was here, something, and this had to just go from here and this had to go from here. Those distances are very different. They will arrive in their own time. They will leave at the same time, but they arrive to an over, and therefore they play at the same time. Otherwise, you've got things playing at different times, right? You've got a finger down on the string, you've got a bow on its point of sound, and it's really confusing. But they will get there in their own time, and they'll play together when we feel that everyone is over their destination. That makes sense.
So one marker of deciding how to do it is actually the physical distance that the bow has to leap and the hand has to leap. But I mean, I could also adjust the speed.
Would you say they never actually feel uncoordinated, though? Do you know what I mean? Like between the two of them, even if one's doing a massive leap, say the bow's doing a massive leap and this is not doing a massive leap. Is that what you mean, Kristen? That they do actually feel that they're landing at the same time, even if they're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a bit of a grey area. I get a bit mixed up with the finger being the finger that plays gives the information to the bow to play.
Yes, that's right.
So, but the finger doesn't have to be there first. They can arrive at the same time, and it's still. So there needs to be a moment of gathering, kind of above the point of sound, where they meet.
That's right.
And then it's the finger first, kind of. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So here's a good example, Kristen. Like if we just made this, right? I'm just making it up. So if you take this chord, right, this has to leap to get to this, and this has to leap to get to that. In terms of speed, they are all sent at the same time, right? If you did it in slow motion, but geographically, you know, the second and third finger are going to get to over their spot before my first finger, right? And probably before the bow, actually. But they're all over those spots, and then they are timed by the playing, which is cued by the left arm. It's a lovely thing to feel, and it's really important to feel, because otherwise we're trying to move things at the same speed when they're not. They are at different distances from their destinations. We also can't have them playing early, because that's weird too, right? Then they're stuck down and someone else is still traveling. Yeah, does that clarify that?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Great.
Could I jump in with a question?
Yes, please.
If you could, I'm trying to understand the ping moment.
Yes.
Would it be the same as kind of like you've got that feeling of groundedness, like when you're about to jump, and you've got that feeling of groundedness with the finger, you know, the weight of the finger into the string? Is the ping moment the moment you kind of you release the tension, or the what you release, so you're kind of up, and then you're using the sub touch to travel, as you know, so you're using the string as a guide rail, really? Would that be right? You're not leaping off the string,
right? Unless we, sometimes we have to, right?
Yeah. Of course.
So yeah. Absolutely, what you're talking about is the ping or the click. We actually often go to make ourselves do it. Is that sort of magic relationship between this and going, and they are combined. Not that they happen at the same time, but the timing of this produces the timing of that, right? And that's really what the ping moment is that relationship. It's why we can't wait down here, because then it's sort of null and void. What we feel in that ping is exactly what you're describing. There is this, it's the finger, hand, and forearm unit, and it's really just like when we jump, we're not jumping from our toes or our feet. They do play a role, but it's really this that is going to make the jump, right? The fingers are on the end of that. And there's this beautiful feeling of a profound relationship with the floor we're on here that sends us to the new place, just like with our feet. And what we do feel on the end of the finger is very much what we feel on the bottom of our feet, which is that lovely little spring off. You know, the fingers and the feet, they're not dead. They're not just, you know, the body's not doing it and the feet just sort of coming along like this. It's a very alive experience that we're talking about in that ping. And then whatever touches, can touch, feels good touching, and that sub stuff. You know, if we're not touching the strings, we are touching wood and furniture, if you like, right? Other parts of the furniture is what we have to know and become familiar with. So if it's a happy, simple leap, you know, maybe we are able to sub-touch the string the whole way. If it's a really tricky leap, maybe we're just sub-touching mostly furniture on the way. But acknowledging what we're touching is really hugely helpful. Does that make sense?
So that's that word spring. You know, if you imagine that you had like a coil in the tip of your finger and you pressed it down and then ping, and then would that be kind of, yeah, that was the image that's in my mind.
Yeah, and you can feel the whole arm, you know, this is like the body, you know, it's got power to it. This is not light and airy and floaty. This is like, boom, we're off.
Yeah. Are there any other exercises that you could cultivate that sort of extreme sensitivity in the fingertips?
Sally, do you want to jump in with your lovely one finger things?
Yeah, I mean, I love, Leslie, just getting them to actually do what Sophie asked us to do, which is to feel objects around the room and just imagine that they have no sight. And, you know, they can do this on an array of objects. And I think for all of us, even as an adult, having touched things for 45 years, that moment when you close your eyes and you do it in that way is really magical. It's fantastic to really see what our skin is doing all the time. So I definitely start off by doing it away from the instrument. But then I enjoy sort of chromatic scales that just go up the instrument.
We can't hear you, Sally, but
Oh, I thought I'd sorted that out.
we can see you.
Okay, but I mean, it's just literally, can you hear me now? And just that gives you the opportunity to be doing it in a small, within a small range of movement, because sometimes leaps are so far that they feel fast and they feel big and they almost feel noisy, and just going in semitones feels calmer and allows you to feel that subtraction. Obviously, you can do that with any finger. Is that what you meant, Sophie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also what's lovely is, as I've lost you on the Zoom, is, you know, when we're doing things like that, or inventing just jumping around the instrument like this, leaping around sort of vaguely, is that you can see the arm going up and across and down just like it does when we leap. And I think a common thing with changing positions is that actually people go the other way. If anything, we're sort of stuck further down into the strings, right? There's this sense of dragging rather than springing over things. So that helps us develop that feeling. Does that answer it a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea of touching things with our eyes closed, not just the instrument, but other things to get. It's amazing how much sensitivity right in the very tip of the finger. So great, thanks. Yeah, brilliant.
Great question. Thank you. Other questions? Any other questions?
I've already asked a bunch of questions, but I could do one more. You're about to end. Okay, let's be done.
No. Ask your question. Come on.
Okay. Not obviously not stretching or pulling for shifting, but you're on a finger and you're leaping to a finger. What is the quality of the inactive fingers? How do they participate to become a hand?
That's a good question. It's think of a good answer. So the language that we use with non-playing fingers is that they are weightless. You know, they can't be, if we have dual muscular pull, this, you know, if I've got a finger, like my third finger is playing the string, but this finger is pulling in a completely opposing direction, that's really hard to move because I've got so much tension in the arm. So the non-playing fingers, we describe them as being weightless so that they are alive and part of what the arm is doing. You know, we're looping with the whole unit. One finger is touching and one finger is the point, therefore the point of contact, but the entire unit is going together. So the fingers are still weightless. They are, you can see they are somewhat responsive to that leap. Can you see they're not like frozen, I'm not holding them. You can see them moving as the arm moves and as the finger pings off his spot, right? There's a responsive movement here, but they aren't in any way opposing that movement. So they, I think the summary version is they are alive to it as the team, but they aren't the point of contact. You would feel, if they were not that, you'll feel the hindrance in them. Like the leap won't want to go very quickly. It'll be sort of a little draggy.
So as we can see, this is a topic that goes into so much detail, and in all of our talks that we gave, we, you know, it was like, we haven't got time to include that, we haven't got time to include this, you know, it's huge. And so this is the moment that we can say that because all of these topics are so huge, we offer moments where we get to hang out for much longer periods of time than just 1 hour, like our summer symposium. And Sophie's going to tell us a little bit about it.
Nice job, Sally. So we have a summer symposium. It's a week long. You can do it online or in person if you want to come to sunny upstate New York, in Watkins Glen. We have a basic package. We have a more bigger package if someone's interested in that, with more sessions and lessons. It's July 8th to the 13th, and all the sessions are on the website. We also have, well, I guess I'm going to Australia soon, in about 10 days. We have a workshop in Brisbane, University of Queensland, May 18th to the 19th. And you can register for that online. And we're totally delighted to announce we have our first pedagogy certificate cohort. And we will be running the first round of that for a year, and then we'll open it up to a new cohort. So that's super exciting. Thanks so much. All right, we will upload the recording as soon as we can and share that. Bye, everybody.
So you will have already heard pretty much all of the fundamental principles about leaping from Sophie already, but I thought that I would dig a little deeper into some of the specifics of left arm leaping as a way of answering some of the questions that came up as people were registering for this event. So if we don't answer your question, please remember that we do have the Q&A in the Zoom cafe at the end, so stick around for that and we will clear everything up. All right, so one of the things that Sophie explained in her introduction is that for our left arm to follow the same sensible logic that we use when we leap with our legs, we really have to grasp the concept that leaping requires us to aim at a spot on the fingerboard, use the laws of propulsion to send ourselves there, and recognize that everything comes with us as we go. So if we go back to the leaping over a stream example that Sophie used in her introduction, we can see pretty clearly that all of our parts go at the same time. So we don't send our arm or our leg to the other side of the stream before our torso, and we don't leave our old foot dragging through the creek bed. And what this means for our left arm is that we neither anticipate the leap with any part of our body, nor do we leave anything dragging behind. All right. So one specific example of the kind of sort of anticipation that we can sometimes have in leaps rather than everything going together as a unit, one specific example of this on upward leaps would be the fourth finger, which really needs to stay belonging to the rest of the hand rather than stretching forward to its destination. And there are actually two good reasons for this. One is that stretching the pinky away from its source of support, which is the rest of the hand and the forearm, actually makes it very isolated and unstable, in the same way that if you sort of stuck your leg out in anticipation, stuck your leg out in kind of an isolated way in anticipation during a leap, and then tried to land on it, you might actually fall over or sprain your ankle when you arrive. So another reason that the pinky, or honestly whatever finger that we're landing on, needs to stay with the arm rather than stretching out, is that stretching the finger or anticipating with the finger actually introduces two variables instead of one. So if we're stretching our fingers in anticipation of our arrival destination, we've now got to calculate not only how far our arm is moving in space, but also how far away that poor finger is stretching. And so considering how hard it is, right, for us to aim within a millimeter of the correct spot on the fingerboard for accurate intonation to begin with, why would we want to introduce even more uncertainty into the equation, right? So that's another good reason why it's better for all of the fingers to remain with the hand during leaps. All right, so another example of everything really needing to go together is the thumb. So the thumb is simply the passenger of the forearm. And actually, we really need its kind of buoyant, bouncy touch as well to get off that leap off note. So if we come back to our leaping over the stream example, we realize that the question of whether the thumb goes before the rest of the hand or afterwards is actually just as crazy as asking whether, when we're leaping over a stream, our right arm goes before or after the torso. They're connected, so they all go together, right? So I'm going to get back to the thumb in a minute, but for now, let's talk about another couple of elements that often try to anticipate with a leap, especially on downward leaps. And just a small note about downward leaps in general before I get into that specific thing. I think we often have a harder time seeing downward leaps as leaps, but they are just as much as upward ones. So you can really think of it the same way as jumping either forwards or backwards across a stream, right? So different direction, but same logic, same experience. And luckily we don't need eyes in the back of our head to see where we're going during a downward leap on the instrument. But if we, on the downward leap, if we lose that kind of leap logic, then other parts of the body will start to compensate, and that's what we're going to look at now. So one part of the body that will often try and compensate for the lack of that leap logic being present on downward leaps is the wrist. So one classic thing that we can see is the wrist pulling backwards to anticipate that downward leap. And again, if we go back to the stream example, we can see how weird this is. So if we were leaping over a stream backwards, we wouldn't stick our torso out behind us in anticipation of that leap. That would completely disrupt the organization of the movement. So if we didn't have any propulsion at all, right, we could get someone to tie a rope around our waist and drag us backwards across the stream, which is basically what we're doing when we bend the wrist backwards and use it to drag the arm, which actually doesn't really feel very good. Another part of the body that often anticipates on downward leaps is the index finger, also as a way of kind of trying to drag the hand and arm. And it's a bit like the fourth finger stretching out, right, during an upward leap. But again, all this is going to do is disrupt the organization of the movement and introduce more uncertainty into the equation because we have different elements going at different times. All right, one more thing about downward leaps. So the other potentially confusing element of a downward leap is that when we arrive, we still have to engage the string in the same direction as always. So what can happen with downward leaps is that since the arm is moving away from us, in the moment of playing the note that we have arrived over, we can feel like we're falling off the fingerboard backwards. But if you think about it the same way as leaping over the stream, we can leap forwards, we can leap backwards or sideways, and none of that actually changes the way we engage with the surface when we arrive. And the same goes for leaping on the instrument. It's always going to engage toward the string like this. All right, so let's go back to the thumb for a moment, because people often get rather fixated on the thumb as a navigational tool. And this actually brings up the bigger question of how we navigate during a leap, which I think Sally is going to talk some more about. But basically, if we go back to the leaping over a stream, we see that once we have aimed at a spot on the other side of that stream and used the propulsive leap off moment to launch ourselves into the air, we do retain a sense of the ground underneath us and how fast we're moving above it. So in the case of leaping on the instrument, we have a sense of those pitches that we're traversing as we leap from spot to spot. And we also do retain that light touch that Sophie talked about in the opening, and that includes the thumb. But using the distance that the thumb travels along the neck, let's say, as the guiding principle, rather than aiming at a spot on the fingerboard and going there with everything, would sort of be like using the distance that your right foot has traveled to gauge whether or not you've made it across the stream, which would be pretty odd. So the same idea actually goes for so-called old finger and new finger shifts. So we can, if it's helpful, sort of key in on the approximate destination location for a particular part of the finger, hand, forearm unit to help with navigation. So for instance, for me to land from a B in first position on my A string to an F sharp in third position on the viola, my first finger ends up more or less over an A on my D string when I arrive on that F sharp. So we sometimes call this ghost navigation. But this ghost navigation of saying, okay, that's basically more or less where my first finger is going to arrive when I get there, that's not the same as sliding on my first finger on the A string to a D and then playing a major third when I arrive, which would sort of be like getting dragged across the stream on your right foot and then spacing your left foot a certain distance away to land on your destination. So in the end, whatever ghost navigation that we use with the thumb or with the first finger, any finger really, or with touching in other parts of the mechanism, it really does have to include the entire finger, hand, and forearm unit moving together, even if we are zooming in on one part of that experience. And by the way, one last little tidbit for the left arm is that we can and do leap sideways. Or sideways-ness can be part of our trajectory if we're changing strings, right? So for instance, changing from the A string to the G string within the same position is pretty obviously a leap. And so we're going to obey all of the same principles the same way we would if we were leaping left or right across a stream or at a diagonal instead of just forward and back.